Good morning. We're going to begin today's training on the CARES Act ESSER grant private nonprofit schools interim final rule that was released by the U.S. Department of Education yesterday, and discuss some of the implications to you at the private school, at the district, and changes to your application, changes to guidance that will be coming up. This morning, I'm joined by Lenitra Guess, our private school ombudsman here at TEA. Lenitra and I will be switching out, covering different portions of the training. We understand this was not optimal timing for a training, being in the first week of July, but also being right before a holiday weekend. However, we wanted to make sure we got the information out to you as quick as we possibly could. And because we are going into a holiday weekend, we know a lot of people are already taking time off. The training is being recorded, and that recording will also be made available. In the training this morning, we need to make sure that you have registered through the Qualtrics survey link that's been provided. If you have not yet registered, if you will look at the Q&A section on your screen or the chat, you will find a link that you can click on that will take you to a short Qualtrics survey that allows you to register your attendance. We have performance metrics. We have to know how many people we train, how many different school districts and charters we train. So this allows us to take a better count of how many districts that we reached during this training. Again, the training is being recorded, and it will be shared with the people who are registered. So to be able to get a copy of the recording, you need to register at that Qualtrics link that's either in the Q&A or the chat function. We're going to ask you to submit your questions through the question and answer feature in the Teams meeting live event that we're in. All the questions are going to be answered at the end of the presentation. You will not be able to see the question you submitted or other people's questions you submitted, but we are receiving them and we are seeing the questions you submit. If you will wait, a lot of your questions will probably be answered during the training, but we will come back at the end of the training and then cover as many questions as time permits. I do need to tell you, we are using a brand new system. This Teams live event system only became available to the agency on Monday afternoon. No one at the agency has ever used it. No one at the agency knows how to use it. So my staff and I are the first users of this brand new system. We are the pilot. We have watched YouTube videos and read as much online as we could to be able to pull this training together. So if we have a few technical issues, you'll understand that this is literally the first time we've ever used this system. So we're hoping that everything works. It is recording, it tells me that, so we will move forward. This is our generic disclaimer that you're seeing on your screen. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance. It is based on our current understanding and legal interpretation of the CARES Act and the applicable federal guidance. And today we're specifically talking about the new interim final rule that was released in the Federal Register on yesterday. Very important sentence right there in the middle. The content of the presentation is subject to change as a result of further information and guidance becoming available from the federal agencies who have the regulatory oversight of the CARES Act. Presentation does not constitute legal advice from TEA. LEAs are therefore advised to seek your own legal counsel regarding information and guidance that you have questions on. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about the overview of the interim final rule process. This is not the normal rulemaking process followed by a federal agency. Then we're going to talk about how this interim final rule has made changes to the calculation of equitable services to participating private schools. Then we'll talk about how it impacts your consultation process, how it changes the ESSER grant application, and then how it impacts the actual delivery of equitable services to the participating private schools. So with that, Lenitra is going to join in and start talking about the overview of this new process for rulemaking that was used.
Good morning, everyone. I will be talking about the overview of the process that was put in place, the interim final rule process. And so the first thing that you need to know is that it was an emergency process under the Administrative Procedures Act. And I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. Before we get into that, the original guidance that we had provided back early in June was the guidance that we had from USDE at that point. And now this particular law is being superseded by the new interim final rule process. And so there will be some things that will change, including TEA guidance, the application schedules, the affirmation of consultation will be revised and posted next week. And so you will see some changes that will come up due to this new rule that was passed on yesterday. And so just to let you know, this was an emergency process under the Administrative Procedures Act. It doesn't normally happen so quickly, but for this particular law, it did. It became effective on yesterday when it was published in the Federal Register, and the new interim final rule carries the weight of the law. There is a 30-day public comment period after the Federal Register is open, which started yesterday, and I would encourage everyone to read the Federal Register and look at the interim final rule process in detail and provide any comments that you have to USDE by July 31st. USDE is not required to actually respond to your questions or public comments, but they are required to receive those through a public comment period. But I highly suggest that anyone that is working with Equitable Services, whether it be an LEA, an Education Service Center, or private school, read it and please provide your comments to USDE by July 31st. The following slides that we're going to have is going to describe the provisions of ESSER, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, the Section 1117. That is the section that is referenced Title I Part A in the CARES ESSER program. And so that's what we'll be discussing today. First, I want to let you know what did not change from the previous CARES ESSER information that was published. First, it's still available to any students and teachers in private nonprofit schools within the LEA's boundaries, the district boundaries. And so the districts will need to reach out to all private schools that are located within their boundaries that are qualified as a private nonprofit school. All materials and information, as well as instruction or anything that is purchased for Equitable Services, must remain secular, neutral, and non-ideological for the private school. The services must be provided in a timely manner, equitable to the time in which services are beginning for the district. With the new change that just went into effect yesterday, I do want to ask that the private schools, as well as the districts, be patient as TEA work through additional information we're receiving. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that will be changing for the districts to complete. But as a private school, please be a little bit patient because things are going to take a lot longer for services to get started due to all the changes with the new law. So as ombudsman, I will be monitoring and enforcing the requirements of not only the IFR, but any of the other requirements in CARES ESSER that stand. In addition, as it was in the past, the equitable services that are going to be provided in this next school year, they should be obligated during 2021 and address the impact of COVID-19. One thing for districts to understand is that consultation during must occur before the design and development of the district application and the district services. And so that means as a district, you must reach out and provide consultation with the private school before you submit your CARES ESSER application. You will also need to ensure that you're providing as a district during consultation how the service delivery will occur for the private schools, discuss the context of pooling in the event that private schools want to pool their CARES funds for equitable services within a group. And you also need to ensure that during consultation, before any decisions are made, that you have, as a district, reached out to the private school. The goal for consultation is for both the private school and the LEA to reach an agreement and reach common ground on how services are going to be provided to the private school during the next school year, as well as all the other requirements that must be met. The affirmation of consultation will be due September 30th, and there will be a special CARES affirmation that I will show you a little bit later in the presentation. The other item that did not change is that if there are any disagreements between the LEA and the district must provide written rationale of why they disagree with a private school on providing alternative equitable services. And so that is the same under ESSER with your regular title programs when a private school is participating. That did not change with the IFR. In addition, there is no need through the CARES Act for the private school to collect poverty data when using options 1A and 2, and we will discuss those options a little bit later. However, there may be an option where you must receive poverty data, and we'll talk about that. The district will remain in control of all funding and retain ownership and title to all equipment, property, and materials that are purchased for use of equitable services by the private school. In addition, the private school's equitable services must be provided directly through the district or through a contract with a public or private entity. And that is all what will be discussed during the consultation meeting.
So the next thing we want to talk about is the changes to the calculation of equitable services amount that are caused due to this new IFR ruling. So in the IFR, which basically issues new federal rule that carries the weight of a law, the district has options on how to calculate the equitable service amount. So the basic question is this: is the district serving only Title I Part A campuses with ESSER funds, or is the district reserving funds off the top at the district level and then serving any campuses? That's the key decision that then drives the formula for calculating equitable service. So let's talk about the first option. How do you calculate equitable service when the district is only spending ESSER funds on Title I Part A campuses? So basically, the district is allocating down to the Title I Part A served campuses all the ESSER grant. When the district is only spending at Title I campuses, they have three options for calculating equitable services. And in the federal rule, law now carrying the weight of law, the word is may. So the district has the choice how to calculate the equitable service when they're spending all their ESSER funding on Title I campuses. Option 1A is to use the percentage that you calculated under Title I Part A in the previous year, in the 1920 school year, and use that same percentage that was calculated for equitable services on the Title I allocation, use the same percentage on the current ESSER allocation. Option 1B is to take a new count. This is the only time the district may ask for poverty data from the private schools. Option 1B calculates the proportionate share using the count of age 5 to 17 students in the district and the count of ages 5 to 17 students residing in a Title I attendance area who are enrolled in the private school. So this is your basic Title I equitable services calculation. So 1B, you would take the participating private schools and you would use the Title I calculation process to determine the amount of equitable services. But there is also option 2. Option 2 is the same calculation as the April 30th USDE guidance. It is the same calculation that we had already provided for districts to follow. Now, the important thing to remember in the new rule, if the district is allocating all the ESSER money down to Title I Part A campuses, you have to keep in mind that the supplement not supplant methodology requirement under Title I applies on the Title I side, which means the ESSER funds have to be allocated to those Title I campuses in a Title I neutral manner. So the ESSER funds are treated the same way as your Title I funds when you're calculating your Title I supplement not supplant methodology. Let me be clear, it does not add a supplement not supplant requirement on the ESSER funds. It's only if the LEA is allocating all the money to Title I campuses, it's the Title I supplement not supplant methodology that has to treat the ESSER funds the same way. So all the money goes to Title I campuses. The district has 3 options. Any other district who is reserving funds at the district level or serving any non-Title I campuses only has 1 option, and you must calculate equitable services by option 2. This is the same original calculation guidance that we already provided, where you are calculating the proportionate share by counting age 5 to 17 students in the district and age 5 to 17 students in the participating private schools to come up with your calculation. So let's look at an example of each one of these 3 methods. So option 1A, the district is serving only Title I Part A campuses with ESSER funds, and 1A, they choose to use the prior Title I equitable services calculated percentage. So they go back to their 2019-2020 Title I data, and they find in their documentation that the calculated percentage for private schools under Title I in the 1920 school year was 4.7%. So line 1, the district's current ESSER allocation is $55,000. Line 2, they enter the 4.7% Title I percentage from 1920 school year. And then they multiply line 1 by line 2, and that calculates the ESSER equitable service amount, which in this example would be $2,585. So this is a very easy, simple, and quick way to calculate equitable services using the prior year's Title I percent. Option 1B, again, is districts only serving Title I campuses, but where they're using updated data to calculate a new equitable service percentage. So line 1, they take the total low-income student count age 5 to 17 within the district. This example, the district has 650 low-income students age 5 to 17. Line 2 is the total low-income student enrollment age 5 to 17 for those students who reside in a Title I attendance area within the district and are enrolled in the private school. This example, there is 30. Line 3 is your total low-income enrollment age 5 to 17, 680 students in this case. Line 4, the same $55,000 ESSER allocation. You then divide line 4, the allocation, by line 3, the total low-income enrollment, to get your per pupil amount, which becomes $80.88. You then calculate that per pupil of $80.88, multiply it by line 2, your total low-income student of 30, and in this calculation, your allocation is $2,426 for equitable services. So there is a difference in the different calculations. And if you went to option 2 for the same type of calculation, this is districts who are serving any non-Title I campuses or using money at the district level. So they're using the total age 5 to 17 enrollment. The total 5 to 17 enrollment in the district on line 1 is 1,120 students. Line 2, the total student enrollment age 5 to 17 at the participating private schools is 90, which gives you a total of 1,210 total enrollment age 5 to 17 by adding lines 1 and 2 together. Again, line 4 is your $55,000 ESSER allocation. You divide your allocation on line 4 by the total enrollment on line 3, and you get a $45.45 per pupil. You then multiply that per pupil on line 5 by your number of private nonprofit school student enrollment on line 2, and you get an equitable service allocation of $4,090. Now there's a note at the bottom, and just to tell you, in this example, that is more than the 5% that TEA calculated. So if this were a true district's numbers and they were calculating by option 2, they would need to contact our department office to request additional funding to cover the remaining private nonprofit services, because 5% of this allocation is less than the $4,090. That piece did not change with the IFR rule. So, assuming all 3 of these calculations were on the same district, you see that it is going to make a difference in the amount of equitable services that are provided by the district to their participating private schools. These numbers are intentionally calculated to show you the exact same district using all 3 methods. So option 1A, using the prior year percentage, you see is 2585. But 1B, calculating a new percentage based on the schools who are actually participating this year in the ESSER program, Equitable Services, gives you 2426. Or if you went option 2 and we're calculating on the full amount, it is 4,090. So it does bring up a question that there is going to be a difference depending on the method of calculation. Option 1A and 1B benefit the school district. Option 2 benefits the private school. In the end, this is the school district's decision. But this has to be discussed with private school officials during consultation. The goal of that consultation is to reach agreement. If there is not agreement on the method of calculation, the district still must justify in writing for the private school officials why they choose the option they chose. You may want to look, if you're only spending the money on Title I campuses and you have the choice of all 3 options, you may want to look at all 3 options to see what it does. If you're using the ESSER funds on non-Title I schools or at the district level, you have one option, and that is option 2. So once we get the total private school allocation that was shown on the previous slide, depending on how you calculate, which option you use to calculate, you then must identify the calculation for individual participating private school equitable service amount. So you start with the total equitable service amount that you calculated under option 1A, 1B, or 2. And I just picked one of those options, and we're going to start with the 2426. So that's our total amount of equitable services that was calculated. Line 2, we have 90 students in the participating private nonprofit schools, age 5 to 17, because we're doing age 5 to 17 on enrollment for everything for the calculation process. The age 5 to 17 enrollment is specifically stated in the IFR. So it is in the rule that for the calculation process, we only use age 5 to 17 students. And that should say 17, not 5 to 7. We'll fix that before we send the slides out. Line 3 is you're calculating the per pupil, dividing line 1, the 2426, by line 2, the 90 students. And that gives you a per pupil of $26.95. So line 4 is our individual private school enrollments, age 5 to 17. Private school number 1 has 40 students. Private school number 2 has 50 students. So we do the calculation for both schools, and we multiply line 3, the per pupil, $26.95, times line 4, the individual school enrollment. And for private school number 1, the equitable service in this example is $1,078. Private school number 2 in this example, the equitable service amount is $1,348. So there's two calculations. The calculation in the application that your district submits to TEA is the overall equitable service amount using option 1A, 1B, or 2. At the district level, you must further calculate these additional steps shown here to calculate the individual equitable service share for each participating private school. So just a reminder, if the district level, you're serving only your Title I Part A campuses, calculating under option 1A or 1B, remember that supplement not supplant methodology requirement under Title I applies on the Title I side, so just don't forget that. Lenitra is going to talk about how this all impacts your consultation process.
Okay, as we talk about consultation, there are still, it's still a requirement under here. And one of the things that districts must ensure that if consultation has already been completed, I know some of you did discuss the CARES Act immediately when it came out with your private schools, and you had consultation, you discussed what the private school needs were, and you somewhat have built a plan on what you will be doing for this next school year. However, due to this new change with IFR, we must have documentation that you consult again. So even though you've already consulted, you will still have to reconsult and have that documented at the district level as well as the private school level, because you need to be able to show that you reconsulted after the new rule took effect. And you also need to consult to share if the district is changing the calculation options. So to be able to share what those different calculation options are with the private school, help them to understand it, go over the numbers that it looks like for this next school year, you need to have that opportunity to do that. The consultation timeline, we're recommending for districts to extend that time. If you already have consulted, contact your private nonprofits that you have been in contact with and let them know that you need to reconsult with them. If you have not consulted yet, we're asking that you slow down just a little bit, because there are going to be some new changes that are coming through TEA, and as far as the application and things that may be different in the coming weeks, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you can consult, but you don't want to have to turn around and go back in 2 weeks. Also, expect some additional information, as I said, that will be made available through TEA in the next coming weeks. So that's why we're asking districts to kind of hold off. If you have not had your consultation time, let the private school know that you will be rescheduling it. And I know it puts a lot on the districts, and that's why we're just asking everyone to be patient with everything that's going on and having to prepare for the new school year as well. And the major reason why we're asking you to slow down on the consultation as a district is because due to this new rule, as Corey just explained, it could drastically change the amount of equitable services that are available depending upon which option the district decides to make. The district does have the final decision on the calculation option used after consultation, and they must provide that written rationale to the private school officials if there's a disagreement between the calculation method that the private school desires and the decision that the LEA makes on the calculation rule. One of the things that we want districts and private schools to understand is that USDE changed the rules. This was not a decision that TEA decided. It was not the districts that decided that there needed to be multiple options. It was a new rule under USDE. So our job, regardless of what you think of that decision, is to make sure that we are implementing what the requirements are and we're following those requirements. The affirmation of consultation availability, that form will be delayed just a little bit in the next couple of weeks, but I will show you what it's going to look like. But the due date remains the same, September 30th, because you'll still have plenty of time to get that completed. And so on the next slide, what I'm showing you is just, this is the top half of the draft CARES affirmation of consultation form. As it's been in the past with our ESSA affirmation of consultations, the district is going to put their name in, their county district number, their ESC region number, and then they will need to do a form for each private nonprofit school that wants to participate. If a private nonprofit school is not participating, the district will just keep information on file, but they will not need to submit this form. And you have instructions at the very top. There's just few instructions that is saying that the district and the private school will review the elements of consultation, which I'll go over, and then you will need to sign it after you have discussed the use of funds section. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of what those sections look like. Under elements of consultation, you will see a few check boxes. And within those check boxes, all I have right here are just a few of them. And so as a district in the private school, these are the requirements for consultation under CARES. And so one of the things that's going to change already on this form is that there will be check boxes that the LEA will need to physically check off as they go over each consultation element. And so the first one talks about eligibility, and it talks about the private nonprofit school must be a K-12, must be within that K-12 elementary or secondary range in existence before the enactment of CARES, which occurred on March 13th. And I know that some of you have asked questions online, more information about the CARES Act, and there is a presentation that is available that goes more in detail over some of the basics of who is allowed to be a private nonprofit to receive services. And that information will still remain true. And we'll put a link for that so you'll be able to see where those recordings are and be able to go back and listen to it. But as you go through this, you'll see, like, for example, the items must still remain secular. Anything that the private school is using for equitable services, as well as the services must be equitable. And then I have another page that's going to just tell you a little bit more that's under the consultation side of it, and that is that it must be timely, and that the LEA still remains in control of the funds. And so as the LEA and the private school walk through this confirmation, this affirmation of consultation, both parties will be able to see what the requirements are and must check off so that you can assure that you're following everything that would meet the requirements of the law as an LEA as you talk through the elements of consultation with the district. And as you can see down, on that last one, it talked about reporting. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit. Both parties may need to provide information for TEA reporting requirements. We will still need to have reviews. We'll be under, I'm sorry, I just lost the word, but we'll have desktop monitoring reviews. And so it's important that the district keeps documentation of everything they're doing. And control of funds, when we talk about the control of funds entitled to materials and equipment, there are some questions asking, can a private school still purchase equipment for online learning for students or for teachers to use? And the answer is yes. And I have posted a copy of, and if you look under the published, you'll see the link in the chat box of our FAQs that answer a lot of the questions that you have regarding what is allowable and not allowable. Even though some of those questions we will be revising to meet the intent of the IFR, but there are a lot of Q&As that are still going to remain the same. So I would advise that you look at that as well as the recording link that I will put up a little bit later. And next we go to the use of funds section that's going to be on your affirmation of consultation form. And so on that, I copied just a few of them. And so as you can see, the very first one, which is very flexible, is that the funds may be used for any activity authorized under the Elementary Secondary Education Act, the Disabilities and Education Act, the Adult Education and Family Literacy, and you can see that funds may be used for any of those allowable activities for equitable services within a private nonprofit school. And so these are the use of funds that the LEA will walk through with you. And so these boxes will be boxes in which the LEA will check which one that particular school plans to participate in. And so we know that this is just a snapshot at the very beginning of the school year, but if you know that, for example, as a private school, you're going to want to provide your principals and school leaders with resources, or you're also going to work on coordination of preparedness and response efforts, then the LEA would check those two boxes for you. And this is going to be an electronic submission. So we're asking the LEAs electronically click on the boxes so that we can capture data. There will be additional data that we'll collect later in the school year and at the end, but this just gives us a snapshot of how each private school intends to provide services. And then the next slide shows just a few more of the use of fund requirements. There are actually 13 or 12 use of fund requirements under the CARES Act, which remains the same under the IFR. And so we'll have those on here. You can see training and professional development for staff, specifically on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases. And so these are items that are on that use of funds. Planning for and coordinating long-term closures. If you know that as a private school, you may be closed a little bit longer and doing online services to your students and using technology, then that might be a box that you share with the LEA that you need to use your services for. And so as an LEA, they will click one or more boxes, and then you will get to the end, the next slide, that's going to show the signature boxes. And so when you get into this area, if at all possible, we're asking that the LEA and the private school do an electronic signature. And we do realize not everyone has access to that, but if so, we ask that you will do an electronic signature so that you can submit this electronically with all the electronic boxes selected. And it will be due September 30th. We show on the affirmation where it's going to be uploaded by the LEA, and then the LEA in the private school keeps a copy of this affirmation. And as I said, these are just some draft shots of what the application, the affirmation of consultation will look like, to give you some idea of what is being included there. And now we're going to go to the impact of the ESSER grant application.
Okay, unfortunately, this new IFR does change things in the grant application. So want to remind you the timeline for your district's application. The application became available June 12th. It is a two-part application. Part one is a PDF, part two is an Excel spreadsheet for all your budget information. The PDF on part one is where the signature is. And I want to take a minute to ask people, districts, in any time you can, if you will electronically sign part one, the same way Lanisha was talking about the affirmation, do an electronic signature and save it, continue to save it as a PDF. Then we can extract the data out of your application and will not have to ask you as many questions on your quarterly report submission. If you print it out, hand it to the superintendent for them to sign it with a pen, and then you scan it and send it back to us, it's accepted as your application, but that has negated us being able to extract your data. So anytime you can sign electronically, save it back as PDF before submitting, that works. The other thing I want to point out to you is districts, you must submit both part one and part two. You're submitting them by email, but you must submit both files or you do not have a submitted application. So the application was available June 12th. It will close August 24th as originally scheduled. August 24th will also be the date that is for the required amendment for private nonprofit school changes that we're going to talk about in a minute. It closes August 24th because we will reallocate in September any funds that are not applied for. So how does the IFR impact your grant application? Well, favorite answer, it depends. It depends where you are at in the process. So if you have not submitted your application, wait for the new private schools questions to be added to the application and then submit the full application. If you have already submitted, but your application has not been negotiated, you need to notify your negotiator that you need to make changes to the private school questions, and you will be able to update the private school questions during your negotiation of your application. Now, if you've already received a NOGA or you're in final review, which means it's already left the grant division, then you will be required to amend the application to include the new private school section And that is the required amendment that must be submitted by August 24th. So there are about 200 of you who have already, I'm assuming, already completed consultation because you've already submitted your application. So those applications are in process. The majority of the state has not submitted yet, so you will fall into the first bullet. But we are having to change the application schedule, the program schedule in the PDF part of the application that includes your programmatic information for private schools has to change. So the districts you're accustomed to the application, you've reviewed it, you know that section 5 is the private school information. Section 5 and 5A will remain the same. There will be a new section 5B that will then direct the district to complete either 5C or 5D. And then the existing 5B becomes the new part of section 5D. So let's show you what this looks like. So in the existing application, you have part 5, which is the basic questions. Do you have private nonprofit schools within your boundaries? And are any of them participating? Those are yes, no radial buttons. 5A is the 2 basic assurances that you sign off if you have any private schools participating. So 5 and 5A will remain exactly the same. There's going to be a new section 5B. It will be a questions pretty much exactly like what's on your screen. So 5B will ask, how is the school district using ESSER funds to serve public school students and staff? And you're going to select one of the 2 options. Either all funds are allocated to Title I Part A served campuses, in which you will then go and complete section 5C, or you will select that ESSER funds are reserved at the district and or allocated to non-Title I as well as Title I campuses, and you will also complete section 5D. So section 5B is literally this one question, 2 options. You select one of the 2 options. The new section 5C is for districts who checked in 5B that they are allocating only to Title I Part A campuses. And then you will be calculating your ESSER equitable service amount by either option 1A, 1B, or 2. So there's 3 options in question 5C. So if you're selecting option 1A, you're going to fill out this chart. And this is the same chart that we talked about in the examples earlier. If you're calculating by option 1B, you will fill out this data chart. And if you're going to use option 2, instead of repeating the option 2 chart twice, it tells you to complete section 5D below. And 5D is the existing calculation chart that everyone who is using option 2 to calculate equitable services by the proportionate share of total student enrollment ages 5 to 17, you will complete this data chart. So those are the changes to the application. It's not major changes, but it is additional information that we must collect and be able to approve your notice of grant award. So again, if you have not submitted, we ask that you wait till next week when these changes to the application will be published. Or if you've already submitted but have not negotiated, talk to your negotiator, make those changes during negotiation. But if you have already submitted and you're already past the final approval phase or have a NOGA already, then you will be required to amend to include those new data sections. So Lanisha is going to talk a little bit more about how this IFR changes the delivery of the services to the private school.
Okay. The first thing that will change is that the expenditures for the equitable services may not begin until the consultation process has occurred. That is one of the new rulings in the IFR. And you also need to complete any new calculation information as well. Districts are required to amend the application. And so even if you have submitted already, as Corey stated earlier, the districts will need to amend the application and must cease spending funds until the revised consultation process occurs. It's very important that we have information, as well as you have information, showing that after the IFR was published July 1st of 2020, that you have documentation to support you did reconsult with the private schools. In the event that they did want to discuss any other changes as far as option 1, 2, and 1A, 1B, and 2, and any of the other information. So you do have to have notes to be able to look at that and say, yes, we consulted again on July 17th with the private school. Here are our notes to show that we did that. You need to be able to produce that. So yes, you must reconsult. There is a reminder that equitable services still must serve all participating private schools, regardless of the option that is selected, in order to calculate the overall equitable services amount. So you're still looking at all participating private schools within your district boundaries. And so what we have done was included the 34 CFR 76 here that states, irrespective of the measure a district uses to determine the equitable service amount, the LEA still has the obligation to give students and teachers in the private school the opportunity to receive the CARES Act services. The location of the private schools, students' residence does not impact the count of students. That's a question that we received when CARES first came out. It does not matter where the student lives. What matters is what private nonprofit schools that want to participate are located within your district boundaries. And that determines how you're going to calculate the district's, the equitable services amount. And so the student is not required to reside within the district boundaries. It's only that private school building that needs to be in your district boundaries. And then you're counting the students within those district boundaries. The private school must be located physically within the boundaries of the school in order to be eligible for services. So if you don't have a private school at all within your boundaries and you've reached out and you show that you've made a good faith effort in reaching out to see if there are new private schools that have opened in your area, or if there are private schools that never participated in the past with title services, the district's responsibility is to ensure they've made a good faith effort to see if there are any additional private schools located within their physical boundaries, and then they keep that on record. If there are not, then you will not have any private schools that you will be calculating services for, even if students residing within your district are attending a private school outside of the district. We will be having an update to the CARES Act. I did post this link the link to our CARES documents into the chat box so that you could see it. Our current PMP guidance that is specific to equitable services that is posted, there will be some changes to that guidance, but there will not be changes to every question. There are a lot of those questions, the majority of those questions and answers will remain the same. And so for now, what we ask is that you review those questions, knowing that there will be some changes in this next week or two where we go in and revise some of the questions so that you have an updated answer that reflects the IFR rule. For questions specific to the CARES Act ESSER program or quarterly reporting, and the quarterly reporting is what the LEA will be completing, you would contact the Department of GCA, and you will contact them as an LEA at grantsupport@tea.texas.gov. And at the bottom, you can see the website for all of our coronavirus FAQs and information. If you have questions specific to equitable services with the CARES Act, then you would contact the ombudsman. You would email the ombudsman address, which is pmpombudsman@tea.texas.gov for additional information. If you are an LEA, your ESC is able to provide additional support for you as well. And as I said, there's also there are 2 trainings that have occurred already specific to private nonprofit and receiving services. And though I will post that in the chat so that you will be able to have that direct link to view any of the recorded videos from the past. And then finally, if you need assistance on completing your application as an LEA, want to know the status of your application or negotiations as a district, you will contact the Grant Administration Division. And so now we're going to turn it over. We're going to begin to answer questions that have been submitted through the live chat.
Okay, I can see many of you are starting to drop off at this point. That is fine. The rest of the time this morning will be spent answering questions that have been submitted. So we're going to go to those questions now. Right now, we're sitting at over 100 questions that have been submitted. We likely will not have time to address all of them. To be honest, we probably may not know the answer to all of them, as this is a brand new interim final rule. Again, it just posted and became effective in the Federal Register yesterday. So I'm going to start answering some of the questions that have been submitted, and you're just going to have to be patient. This is where we're having to flip back and forth between a couple of screens in this new system. So first question, to be clear, the slide about the consultation said if consultation already completed and the district is changing the calculation option, consultation must be reopened, revised consultation must be documented. Our district is using option 2 and will continue to use option 2, not the lower amount that would be generated under 1A or 1B, which basically provides more services to our private nonprofit schools. Since we're not changing to option 1A or 1B, do we have to reconsult if we're not changing that decision? How you do the reconsulting in this scenario where you had already consulted, we're already using option 2, you're going to continue to use option 2, you must continue the consultation process to notify your private schools of that decision. We don't want the private schools sitting out there wondering and waiting for a consultation invite that's not coming. So to extend your consultation in this scenario, it could be a notification that is sent out to all your participating private nonprofit schools, simply telling them the district has chosen to remain with option 2, which is most beneficial to the private school, and you're not changing. But that notification becomes part of your consultation process and becomes part of your documentation. In the Q&A document, question 7 states if a private school declines services, the district has no further responsibility. Just want to make sure the new rules, we don't have to go back and reach out again. No, if the private school has declined services under the ESSER grant, you have met your requirement and you are not, you have no further responsibility, and you are not required to go back and ask them a second time because of the new rules. Is the LEA required to serve private schools within their boundaries whom they have not provided services before? Yes. Any private nonprofit school located within your boundaries is eligible to receive services under the ESSER grant, regardless of which option you choose to calculate the amount by. Okay, I'm gonna have to flip to another screen, so give me just a minute. For your application, can we use the numbers from the PEAM summer submission, or do we have to use the fall submission? The data of the enrollment data you use for age 5 to 17 children in the private nonprofit school and in the district must be discussed during consultation, and there must be a consistent time frame that the data is all collected within a certain period of time. So that is a consultation decision as to what data you use, but the district data and the private school data must be taken within a specified time period. And there is more detail in writing on that in the FAQ document, but I don't remember what the question number is. Is the district allowed to use the restricted indirect cost rate for public schools and the unrestricted indirect cost rate for private schools? You cannot charge two different indirect cost rate because there is no supplemental requirement. The unrestricted rate, the unrestricted indirect cost rate, is the applicable rate to the ESSER grant. However, you are not required to claim the full unrestricted rate. You can claim anything up to the unrestricted rate. So if you're wanting to charge a lower amount of indirect costs for district services and a higher amount within your unrestricted rate for private school services, you can do that. You just have to determine the actual amount that you're going to charge, because as a district, you have the flexibility to charge indirect cost up to your unrestricted rate. Who can sign the application as the authorized official? Does it need to be the superintendent of schools or a designee? The authorized official is the superintendent, unless you have a designated person who has been given authority to sign grant applications. In most instances, it is the school district superintendent, obviously. In most instances, they have also delegated authority to the CFO or the business manager. We accept any authorized official. However, the district must have it documented that that person submitting the application, if it's not the superintendent, that that person has been designated either in writing by the superintendent or by the school board, because that person is now entering the district into a binding legal document. So they must be designated in writing and have an official designation. Okay. Do the changes affect the PPE LEA allocation that was communicated on 6/18? I'm assuming that by this question you are referencing the PPE allotment of masks and face shields and various things that the state's going to be providing to every school district for the start of school. If that is what your question, that is the PPE allocation you're talking about, then no, this IFR change does not impact that PPE allocation. Is option 1A, that is calculating by using the 1920 school year Title I Part A percentage. Is option 1A only applicable if the private nonprofit participated in Title I in 2019-2020? No. Any private school can participate in ESSER equitable services regardless of previous participation in any other program. Option 1A is just intended to give you a very quick, simple calculation for equitable service. So the private schools participating in ESSER do not have to have been the private schools participating under Title I in the 1920 to still use the 1A option. Is it correct the district gets to make the determination on which option to calculate equitable services? Yes. In the end, the final decision rests with the district, but if there is disagreement between the district and the private schools on which option to use, the district must justify their decision in writing to the private schools under the rules of equitable services. If all the campuses in the district are Title I served, can the district opt to keep the ESSER funds at the district level and use option 2 to determine equitable services amounts? Yes. The rule is that if all the money in ESSER is allocated to Title I campuses, then you have the option of 1A, 1B, or 2. In this case, if the district is opting to keep ESSER funds at the district level, that automatically requires the use of option 2. Did you say that if the LEA is spending all ESSER money on Title I campuses, that supplement not supplant kicks back in with ESSER funds? No. This is confusing, and I understand the question. We had talked to 2 different federal attorneys, and they interpreted it slightly differently. But the bottom line is there is no supplemental requirement under ESSER, and the new rule does not change that. What the new rule stresses is that if the district is allocating all the ESSER money to Title I campuses, that on the Title I side of supplement not supplant, they have to make sure the ESSER funds are allocated among the Title I campuses in a Title I neutral manner. So when the district is doing their Title I supplement not supplant methodology for the coming school year, they have to ensure that the ESSER funds allocated to Title I campuses are Title I neutral. So the difference is it's an adjustment, it's an additional piece that the district has to consider in their Title I Part A methodology. It is not a supplemental requirement on ESSER. So to clarify, since the district is using ESSER funds at the district level, the rule change does not impact how you previously calculated equitable service. That is true. If you're using ESSER funds at the district level, you are required to use option 2, which is the same calculation that you previously had been trained on. Can we see option 1A slide one more time? Sure, give me just a second. I just have to go backwards to get to it. Here. So it's now on your screen. To calculate option 1A, you take the ESSER allocation amount, you multiply it by the percentage that was reserved under Title I for equitable services in the 1920 school year, and that gives you your equitable service amount under ESSER. So if you'll remember in the example, the allocation was $55,000. 4.7% was reserved for equitable services under Title I last year. So $55,000 times 4.7%, and it gave you something like $2,464 or something like that. So that's your calculation. So next question, if all our campuses are Title I and we have no PNPs participating in Title I, just Title II and Title IV, do we still provide funds but require economic data to the students? Yes, because you must serve any private nonprofit school that wants to participate. You would have to use option 1B or 2. You don't have any that participated in Title I last year, equitable services. You have no percentage under 1A, so you would be required to use option 1B or option 2. If you've already consulted, can you discuss this via email with private nonprofits and come to agreement that way? If you're not changing, you definitely could do the notification through email. If you are changing your calculation method, I would not advise you to do this by email. You need to have reopen your consultation and continue that process the same way you had the initial consultation, whether that be by online meeting or whatever method you used. For private schools who do not generally collect income information from parents unless they are applying for tuition assistance, what is the recommended method for determining how many students qualify as low income? Is there a form or survey we must make available to each family to complete? There are 4 methods under Title I for collecting low income student data. You can collect a survey. You can use a proportionality, which means if you have 21% of students that are low income in the district, you can use that proportion down to a private school calculation. So there are 4 different options under Title I, and you are allowed to use any of those 4 options. And I'm going to throw it to Lenitra and see if she wants to add anything on that question real quick before we move on.
I believe that during our basic ESSA webinar for private schools, those 4 measures are in there, and I'm sorry, I don't recall them off the top of my head right now, but if you send an email, I can give you the exact statute for that.
The other thing is the recording of those previous private school trainings and all of our trainings related to the ESSER grant. The recordings are available on TEA's YouTube channel. When you go to TEA's YouTube channel, you will find a new playlist that is the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration, and all of our recorded trainings have been moved there and are accessible to you. Next question. Do the public schools have to decide if their ESSER funds are going to be used only on Title I campuses or to serve all campuses? Yes, basically the new rule now requires the district to make a decision that you're going to allocate all the ESSER money to Title I campuses, or you're going to serve all campuses, which may include keeping funds at the district level. So under the new rule, yes, you now have to make that decision at the district level before you can move forward. And I just want to reiterate something Lenitra said earlier. No services, no expenditure for services can begin until the consultation process, including the new information, is complete. And that includes the district cannot spend money for district activities. You may know that you have 90% of this money available to the district, but with the new rule, you cannot spend money at the district or for the private schools until consultation is completed. If we spend our funds only on Title I campuses but don't have any private schools participating in Title I, will there not be as an ESSER reservation for PNPs? No, not necessarily. Even if you're calculating by low income using option 1A or 1B, or you don't have any that participate in Title I activities, ESSER still requires the district to offer and provide equitable services to any private nonprofit school located within your boundaries who choose to participate. That is a key fundamental piece of statute and the new rule. In the new rule, it doesn't matter which method you use to calculate. Even if you're calculating by low income, under the new rule, you can calculate by any of the three methods. You must still serve all participating private nonprofit schools who choose to participate. Can school districts choose to split ESSER funding for additional Title I funding and general use under ESSER requirements? Yes, the district can choose how they spend their allocation among any of the 12 allowable uses of funds. Okay, please clarify the supplemental plant rules of using ESSER funds at Title I campuses only. Do we lose the flexibility offered in option 2 if we wanted to pay the total payroll cost to offset the FSP, that's the state funding loss of Title I campus regular staff? You do not lose any flexibility, but when you're doing your Title I supplement plant methodology, you must make sure your ESSER funds allocated to Title I campuses are allocated by a Title I neutral. That's the same way you have to ensure your Title I funds are allocated in a Title I neutral manner. So the change in supplement plant is on the Title I side, in that you now must include the ESSER funds into that methodology calculation to ensure that the ESSER funds are being allocated to those Title I campuses, and that the state and local funding being allocated is not impacted just because they got an ESSER amount. But it does not take away any of your flexibility. I need more clarification between option 1A and 1B. All right, option 1A, and I'm going to go back to these slides real quick. Option 1A and 1B are both when the district is going to allocate all their money to Title I campuses. So then they have the option 1A, 1B, or 2. So option 1A is to simply use the percent that was calculated for equitable services under Title I last year and apply that same percentage to the ESSER grant. Doesn't matter if the schools are the same. Just if you calculated last year 4.7% of your allocation was going to private school equitable services under the Title I program last year, you take that 4.7% and you multiply that by your ESSER allocation, and that gives you the amount of equitable services under ESSER. That's 1A. 1B is doing a new calculation. So you take the, let me move to it on the screen. You take the total low-income student enrollment age 5 to 17. I'm going to say now, it may have been May 1, maybe the date that you and your private schools decided on in consultation, but within that window that's allowed in the guidance, you're taking the total low-income age 5 to 17 count at the district. You're taking the total age 5 to 17 private school count of students who reside in a Title I campus, and then you're calculating your equitable share. It's the exact same process that you used last year to calculate that 4.7% under Title I services. You're doing the same process, the same calculation. You're just doing it now with updated numbers based on whatever private nonprofit schools want to participate in ESSER. So 1A is using last year's private school percentage. 1B is calculating a new up-to-date percentage. Next question, we are a 7-1 district, meaning their fiscal year ends June 30th. This application cannot be submitted before the consultations occur, decisions are made, so we cannot expect to have an official grant award for 266, which is the ESSER fund, before we prepare our 1920 financials. Do we backdate the transaction to 6/30, even if the award comes sometime later? Okay, there's a couple of things tied up in this question. First off, if you go to our CARES Act guidance document, there is a section about the impact with state funding, and our state funding staff have responded to a question that tells you how you can still charge to this grant even when you had a 6/30 end of fiscal year. You may not choose to do so, but they're telling you a way it can be done. You will get a preliminary grant award within 10 days of submitting your application, as long as you submit a complete application, Part 1 PDF and Part 2 the Excel budget schedules. That's a new process we're piloting. You will get a preliminary grant award. It will come by email. With that preliminary grant award, you get access to draw down up to 20% of the funds before your application is negotiated. You then receive the full no-go once the application finishes negotiation. So there's a couple things tied into this question. You will have access to 20% of the money rather quickly. And check the FAQ document, because the state funding staff have responded a way that you can do this. Any questions like this that you have about end of fiscal year is the June 30th date. There's like 233 of y'all that have the June 30th end of fiscal year and this award. Contact our state funding division, because they can assist you much more than I can on that issue. But you know, unfortunately, this is the same thing that always seems to happen with disaster funding. The timing on it is always bad and it comes out late. Okay, so our next question, do the same options apply to school-wide districts? Well, technically there is no such thing as a school-wide district. There is only a school-wide campus. I'm assuming you mean a district who only serves all your Title I campuses as school-wide. Even if all your campuses in the district are Title I served and school-wide, it is no different. The options are the same. If you're allocating all the ESSER money to Title I campuses, then you have 3 options for determining the calculation. Would you give a basic definition of a Title I Part A campus? A Title I Part A campus is a campus within the district boundaries who is receiving a campus allocation of Title I Part A funds. That campus is being served by the district's Title I Part A program. So that's a Title I campus. If the district chooses option 1A or 1B, then the LEA can only spend their ESSER share on Title I schools. Is that correct? Yes, but you're looking at it backwards. You don't choose the option first. You choose whether you're spending funds on allocating all the money to Title I campuses, or whether you're going to use money at the district level and allocate it to non-Title I campuses as well. Then you choose 1A, 1B, or option 2. Make sure you make the decision first. You don't just choose the option first. Otherwise, when we monitor, it'll be an issue. Did USDE give a rationale for the change? The way I'm going to address that question is yes. They released a 57-page document. The regulation changes are all in the last 4 pages. If you read the Federal Register document from yesterday, you can access the 57-page document, and the first 10 to 12 pages will basically give you a rationale for why they implemented this new interim final rule and why they used the APA process to do it quickly. By asking the LEA to delay the consultation and decision, doesn't that then delay the receipt of NOGA? Our LEA wants to use funds to offset the loss of the FSP, which ends 8/31, and we want to reclassify those payroll expenses of this fiscal year. Yes, we fully understand that if you delay the consultation waiting on further information, or the mere fact that you have to go back and reopen consultation, that it does delay getting your notice of grant award because it delays submitting the application. You know, I apologize. This is horrible timing, but the bottom line is TEA didn't do this and the districts didn't do this. This came down as a new federal rule that carries the weight of law, so we have to abide by it. In the end, you're going to make the decision locally to delay and redo your consultation and how fast you can get that done. And I also understand most districts are closed for 2 weeks right now. So the timing on this really is not good. Yes, it delays you submitting the application, and yes, it delays the receipt of the NOGA. Again, let me reiterate, you will get access to 20% of that money within 10 days of submitting the application. The higher quality your application is, the quicker it will go through the process because there will be less negotiation. But the new changes to provide the new data in the application is required. Yeah, I know the timing on it is not good. The next question is pretty much a repeat of the last one. The one different part is, when is the latest that you issue NOGAs for the full amount of the ESSER grant being awarded? Because it may impact how districts use the funds. Yes, it can. There is no date on when you will get a NOGA. You know, first off, this is 1,200 paper applications coming in right on the top of your ESSA, your IDEA, your Perkins applications. I was only given 3 additional staff to negotiate these 1,200 applications, so they are processed in the order they come in. Some applications take longer, require more negotiation than others. Now, we designed the application trying to make it as easy as possible to require the fewest amount of application negotiation changes, but you know, we can't tell you what the timeline is to get a full NOGA. That's why we put the pilot in to give you 20% of funding to be accessed, and you get that preliminary NOGA within 10 days. But it's a process, and the process is required under federal regulation. So I can't, I can't change the process and make it go faster. So there is really no way to tell you when you will get your final NOGA. All I can tell you is that I have an amazing staff, and they work long hours, and when most people are taking vacations in the summer, my staff can't, because they're working overtime and doing everything they can to get all these grant applications out and awarded their NOGAs as quickly as possible. And we will keep that same philosophy for this ESSER grant as well, but unfortunately I can't tell you when you'll get a final NOGA. Okay, this says in order for a private nonprofit school to be eligible, they must be K-12. Does that mean the school that is K-5 is not eligible? No, a K-5 private school is still eligible. It just has to be a private school. They must serve at least one grade level between K and 12 to be eligible. Lenitra, am I saying everything correct on that?
Yes, that is correct. And the one thing to remember that it seems that most districts and private schools don't remember is that we're looking at ages 5 through 17 to calculate the services. However, any K through 12 students may receive equitable services.
All right, so we're going to move to our next question. If the LEA chooses option 1A or 1B, does the supplement OSSA plan apply to the ESSER funds? No. The supplement OSSA plant rule is only Title I side. It is not on the ESSER side. So it's not changing anything about there being no supplement OSSA plant rule on ESSER funds. And it doesn't matter which calculation, option 1A, 1B, or 2, there's no supplement OSSA plant rule. If they're using 1A and 1B because they're allocating all the ESSER money to Title I campuses, then on the Title I supplement OSSA plant side, they have to keep in mind that those ESSER funds being allocated to those campuses kind of fall into that methodology. And we'll be working with the Title I people to remind them of this new change as well. It does not impact the ESSER grant. It's an additional piece for the Title I side to pay attention to. Are private schools eligible for services only in the 2021 school year? There is a little bit of confusion around this because USDE's guidance and the rule, neither one address carryover of services to the private nonprofit schools. What we do know is the ESSER funds are good from March 13th of 2020 through September 30th of 2022. So the district's grant can start spending money March 13th of 2020, and the district grant goes through, I don't remember if we ended at the end of June or the end of September, but it covers 2021 and 21-22 school years. So what we're saying until we were told anything different from USDE is that the private school equitable services should plan to be expended in the 2021 school year, but that those services would carry over till the 21-22 school year as well. If those equitable services included equipment, laptops, tablets, for example, the private school could continue to use that equipment, those materials through the 21-22 school year, but then they would be returned to the school district at the end of the 22 school year because the ESSER grant program ends September 30th, 2022. So all materials that are not consumables, all materials and equipment revert back to the district at that point that the grant's over. Because school districts have not yet consulted based on the new IFR, I imagine this impacts whether private schools can order items now for the beginning of the school year since PNPs and districts are unsure as to allocations. Is that correct? It does potentially impact ordering materials and equipment for both the district and private schools to have them for the start of school. You can start that process, but because of this new rule and the potential for a change in the equitable services amount, yes, this new rule could impact ordering and could slow down ordering and receiving those items. If the LEA is serving only Title I campuses, then the PNP can only participate in Title I and not the other 11. No, that is incorrect. The private school can participate in any allowable activity under ESSER for its equitable services. At this point, USDE listed all 12 activities in its guidance as allowable services to the private schools. There's a couple of them that are a little take a little work to make them allowable, but because USDE said all 12 items are allowable, any of those activities, and the district can provide all their ESSER money to Title I, but that does not restrict the private school services to Title I. They can receive different services, different grade levels, different activities, totally different services. The services have to meet the need of the participating private school. Due to school closure, it is almost impossible to provide a textbook to all students because of the class sets used prior to the crisis. Would private nonprofit schools be able to purchase course-specific textbooks? I'm going to have Lenitra jump in on this, but my initial thought is there would be some very restricted caveats. Number one, that the books are not, textbooks are not consumable, so they would revert back to the district. Number two, they can't be, they have to be secular, neutral, and not ideological. So there would be some restrictions. And Lenitra, what do you think?
I would concur with everything that Corey said. The one thing that I always caution private schools to doing is using their services for things that they may have to return. Because if you're planning on, as a private school, to continue doing doing something in the future, you want to be able to purchase that with funding that you can keep, so that you can keep it within your private school. And so if it was textbooks, you're only going to be able to use those textbooks for 1 year, and it cannot have any religious content in it whatsoever. And then you're going to have to hand those textbooks back. So it may not be your best priority use of funds. And there are so many other ways in which you could use funding that it may be better for you to look and see what are the most neediest things that the district can assist with for equitable services. And it's something that you would work with the district on during consultation as well.
Okay, if the district has no participating private schools, then no changes will be needed, correct? That is correct, because the only thing you would mark in the application is in Part A. So there's nothing, no, there's no change for the district that has no participating private nonprofit schools. So if you don't have any private nonprofit schools located within your district, you have to wait for the new PNP questions to be added? No. If you have no private schools within your boundaries, you're only answering question 5. And section 5 remains the same. You could go ahead and submit your application. If ESSER funds are replacing FSP funds, why would a school choose to only serve Title I campuses? Okay, this is the whole issue. Your FSP is being reduced by an amount equal to 95% of your ESSER grant. It's not replacing FSP. In your eyes, it may be. The reality is ESSER is a federal grant program that has federal rules, federal regulations, and allowable uses of activities. So the district has the discretion how they're going to use this money. And they can choose any allowable activity within the statutory list of 12 activities. So it's the district's choice. Many districts are not using the money right now. They're budgeting it for the coming school year. Many other districts are budgeting it for pre-award and summer costs to offset when they're going to receive the reduction in the FSP. But it's the district's decision. And keep in mind, always remember, this is a federal grant, and it is a grant that has to be spent on allowable uses of funds, and it follows all the grant rules. Can charter schools continue with the old application? Yes, charter schools may continue because they do not have physical boundaries, so they do not have a private school requirement. So charter schools can continue with the application as it is. If you don't submit till next week, it'll probably be the updated application anyway, but that does not matter to a charter school because you do not have private nonprofit schools. C, spending funds at the ISD level. This goes back to the fact that if you're having to redo consultation and potentially changing, yes, the district must cease spending these grant funds until that consultation process is completed, because the new IFR, the new rule states that you cannot spend ESSER funds for public or private school services until the full consultation process is complete. So those 200 of you that have already submitted your application, many of you already have your preliminary note, or we're starting to spend money. You have private schools participating and you have to go back and reopen consultation because of the new rule. You have to cease spending money until that consultation is finished. Our IT purchased computers, and all those computers were distributed only on Title I campuses. Is that considered allocating to Title I campuses, even though it is equipment, not dollars? You are using if you used the entire ESSER allocation on those computers that only went to Title I campuses, then yes, you did expend or allocate all your money to Title I campuses. Maybe a little bit of designation by how you documented it at your district level, but those computers are being distributed and they're being tracked on inventory to Title I campuses only. That would be serving only Title I campuses most likely. Again, there could be a little difference depending on how your district issues technology out to campuses, but generally I would say that yes, you're allocating all the money to Title I. Are we saying you can't count any expenses that already occurred in your district? No, I'm saying you can't pay for them yet until you finish the consultation process. You can still know that's what you're going to reimburse, but you can't make the payment with the ESSER funds. You can't pay for any service until the consultation process has been finished. If we do not have any students that fall under Title I, could we potentially not get any funds? I don't know if this is a district asking a question or if this is a private school. Districts, if you receive a Title I allocation, you have an ESSER allocation. If this is a private school, you do not have to have Title I eligible students to receive service, because regardless of how the district calculates the equitable service amount, they must serve any private nonprofit school within their boundary who chooses to participate. So I'll answer kind of both ways because I don't know which way the question's really intended. Another question about the difference between the calculation of 1A and 1B other than the year of the calculation. You're pretty much right, it's the year. 1A is using last year's Title I allocation. 1B is doing the same allocation but using current data. In some ways, 1B could be a more equitable calculation because you may have a different group of schools participating under ESSER than you had under Title I last year. But basically, it's the year. 1A is last year's Title I calculated percentage. 1B is collecting the data now and doing a new calculation with potentially different set of private schools. CARES ESSER funds had a previous date of March 13th as the start. We were told to keep receipts and schools could be reimbursed expenses back to the date. Is that now changed to July 1 when the IFR was issued? No, you just can't start paying for anything, paying for any services until after consultation. But you still have a pre-award start date of March 13th on your grant.
And Corey, can you address that for private schools in case that was a private school that submitted that question about March 13th?
I think it's the same for private schools as well. I think the private school equitable services could go back to March 13th as well. They just can't receive any service until consultation is completed. All right, we'll keep going. We've still got, I've got until 11:30 before the system's going to shut us off. So we still have plenty of questions to try to get through. It's confusing. The terms private nonprofit, non-public, and private are all used the same way. Non-public and private schools could be for-profit, correct? Yes. Anything from the Department of Education is usually going to come out saying non-public. It may come out saying private school. Anything from TEA, we will reference private nonprofit because only private nonprofit are eligible with any of the programs that we work with Equitable Service. So yes, you may see non-public, you may see private school, you may see private nonprofit school. Under the ESSER grant, they're all used interchangeably, but to be eligible, the private school must be a private nonprofit school. That's in the basic eligibility requirement for Equitable Service. Yes, it's confusing, and USDE always uses a different terminology than what the state uses, but it is private nonprofit schools are who is eligible. It does not matter where the student lives, but option 1B aren't the instructions to calculate living with, yeah, okay. Yeah, our slide says it doesn't matter, and we'll adjust that slide. The slide says it doesn't matter the residence. It doesn't matter the residence of the student for option 1A and 2. But yes, if you're calculating under option 1B, you're only calculating private school students who live within a Title I campus attendance area in the district. So under option 1B, the residence does matter for calculation purposes only. Who receives services, it does not matter the place of residence, regardless of which option you calculate with. So we will clarify that slide before we send the slides out. It needs a little caveat added to it. How does the pre-award option work with private nonprofits? If they purchase something in April, can they use their equitable service amount to be reimbursed? That's a good question, and that's one we're trying to get U.S. Department of Education to answer. Stimulus money under CARES Act, in which the ESSER grant is part of, is considered disaster relief money. Sometimes in disaster relief money, they make some exceptions and give a little bit more flexibility where the district can send a check to reimburse the private school for something they already purchased, but then the ownership then becomes with the district. They did that in some of the Hurricane Harvey disaster funding. However, not yet with ESSER. So right now, it's the basic rules of equitable service that the district can only provide service. They cannot provide funding, which would include any type of reimbursement to the private school. So that is a question we submitted to USDE. We're waiting for a response from them. Sometimes they give flexibility in these type of situations, and other times they don't. So right now we don't know, but right now I would tell you do not send money to a private school to reimburse them for things they already purchased. You might be able to do that later, but right now that's not really an option. If we now have to wait and consult again, will this delay us getting submitting and getting the NOGA for the full amount of ESSER fund to recode salaries? Yes, there will be a delay. When is the latest you issue NOGAs? I think we've answered this question or a very similar one already. This is the whole conversation earlier that I can't give you a date when you will get a NOGA. There's no way to know. This is a repeat of a question we had earlier. If the LEA is only serving Title I campuses, does that mean the private school can only do allowable Title I? No, the private school can still meet any identified need that fits within the 12 allowable activities. That's pretty close to the duplicate question we had earlier. Can you ask ESC personnel questions rather than calling TEA first? Yes. In fact, I really encourage you to contact your regional ESC first. We work with your ESCs. I provide information out to them. I send them information. Other than today's training, I normally train them first because districts do go to the ESC a lot before they come to us. Your ESC has a better ability to answer your question quickly than the limited staff I have at TEA. They may not know the answer, I'm going to tell you that, but they can reach me and get an answer, because when you submit a question to TEA, you send a question to grant support, you go into a queue. And most likely, I may have to put it through the coronavirus meeting and your answer be posted in the FAQ document. If you call your ESC, chances are you may get the answer right then, or they literally may only have to call me to get an answer. So I really encourage you to reach out to your ESC first. If I can't help you, then by all means, reach out to my office. How does the PNP calculate their number of low-income students? Again, you can use any one of the 4 options that are allowed under Title I. You may do a survey, you may do proportionality, and there's a couple more. You may extrapolate the number from other data. There's 4 options, and that is addressed in the basic services trainings, and it's under section 1117 of ESSA, where you can find those. If you can't find them, contact your ESC, because I guarantee you they have that answer. Can you clarify about Title I school-wide? If all my campuses are Title I school-wide and PNP does not participate in Title I, can I still use option 2 for a calculation? If you're allocating all your money down to Title I campuses, so you're not keeping anything at the district level, everything's going to your Title I school-wide campuses, you have the option of 1A, 1B, or 2. Yes, you can still use option 2 to calculate equitable services. If Title I options are selected, does the private school need to determine the number of students that meet Title I eligibility that also live in the boundaries of the LEA? Yes, if you're using 1B, then the district has to maintain the documentation of that count of Title I eligible students provided by the private school. So during consultation, y'all need to talk about what documentation is required. And it's the same documentation you would require if this was the Title I program. So you're not doing anything differently. You're requesting the same data, and you keep the same documentation that you would use under Title I. How do we document time and effort for pre-award salaries between March 13th and the end of the year? Right now, that's another one of those issues that USDE has not given any flexibility on. So right now, you do have to have some type of time and effort documentation. The easiest thing to do is pay 100% of that person's salary for that time period, and then develop a I've just gone blank. Semi-annual certification for that time period. Most people, I give them that answer and they go, but it's not 6 months. Semi-annual certifications may cover no more than a 6-month period. They can be a shorter period. So if you're going to pay April and May, for example, for 5 staff, you pay 100% of that salary for those 5 staff for those 2 months, and you do the semi-annual certification signed by the staff member and the supervisor for that 2-month period. That's the easiest way to do time and effort. If you pay a percentage of the person's salary, they have to do personnel activity reports in much more detailed time and effort. Again, we're hoping USDE will come back and give us the flexibility that if it's a reimbursement of previous paid expenses, that time and effort's not required, but until USDE gives that flexibility, you must maintain some type of time and effort record if you're paying salary out of the ESSER grant. If you have a private nonprofit who has asked for equitable services, does not have any students that would qualify under 1A or 1B, are they included in the calculations with other PNPs in our district? If the district is putting all your money on Title I campuses, so you have the option of 1A, 1B, or 2. If you're choosing to calculate by option 1A or 1B, that particular private school that has no children who meet that criteria are not counted in the calculation of equitable service, but they still do receive equitable service. So they wouldn't be counted in the first calculation, the overall equitable service amount, but then when you break down that total amount between the participating private schools, they are included because every private school who chooses to participate who is located within your boundaries is eligible for service, whether they're counted in the calculation under 1A or 1B or not. So if y'all haven't noticed, Lenitra is typing my answers as I talk and then publishing them so y'all can see them. So that's why we have a slight delay between questions sometimes, as I talk too much and she can't keep up typing. Slightly off topic, but several districts are wondering if we were paying salaries of locally funded teachers through pre-award March 13 to June 30, would we do the semi-annual or other documentation if they're funded from the ESSER grant from that time period? Same question as before. If you're paying 100% of those salaries, then you can do the semi-annual certification. If you're doing a percentage of their salary, then you must do some type of other PAR type time and effort documentation. Do you have to wait till you receive a NOGA to start ordering cleaning supplies for PNPs? No, once you've fully done consultation, you submit your application and you get that preliminary NOGA with access to 20% of your funds, you can start ordering as soon as you've submitted the application. You can start paying for equitable services as soon as you get that preliminary NOGA. But remember, you've only got access to 20% of your total grant award at that point in time. So it would be reasonable that you would not spend more than 20% of your equitable service amount until you receive the full NOGA. But you can start ordering supplies, providing services after the application is submitted. And remember, you will get the preliminary NOGA with access to 20% of your funds within 10 days of submitting a full complete application that includes Part 1 and Part 2. If we are a school-wide program, what option is recommended? Well, school-wide programs are only a campus-level program. This is a district-level grant, so the district has to choose whether or not you're expending all your money on Title I schools within the district or keeping some at the district level in all campuses, if not everyone is served. That's the first question the district has to make a determination. If you're then allocating everything in ESSER down to Title I schools, you have the option of all three options to calculate. If you're spending money district level or non-Title I schools, you only have option 2, the original way. I can't make a recommendation on how you calculate equitable service. The district, in consultation with your private school officials, discusses and makes that decision. If all campuses are Title I served campuses and the district is eligible for the statement of exemption, will the exemption apply to these funds if option 1 is used? I'm not. District is eligible for statement of exemption. I don't know what that means. Lenitra, does that mean something to you?
I'm not clear on that. If you're still on the call, if you could resubmit more specific question, or you may send it to PNP Ombudsman, and I'll be able to talk with you directly.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know what you're referring to there. I'm sorry. Can't we have a Zoom group scheduled to have the people fill out the application together? If you're talking, can you do consultation by Zoom? Yes, by all means. I'm assuming that's what you mean is a consultation meeting. Can you do a consultation meeting by Zoom to go through the application together? And yes, you can use many avenues are available to you to do your consultation. We're a charter school and there are multiple school districts within our geographic boundary. Will each PNP be allowed to participate in services from multiple districts? No, you are a charter school. You do not have physical boundaries. So you do not provide equitable services. Only school districts with physical boundaries where the private school is located within the district's physical boundary is required to provide equitable services. As a charter school, this equitable service requirement does not apply to you. And Lenitra's response was no, only LEAs. This one is specifically no, only school districts. Because to charter school, you are technically an LEA, but it doesn't apply to charter schools.
Sorry, I typed too fast on that last.
No, that's all right. Is there a way to use option 1A when there are PNPs that did not participate and are not participating in ESSA? Yes, 1A is an option regardless of who's participating under ESSER. It may not be the best option, and you would want to discuss that in consultation with your private school officials, but 1A is an option regardless of who the participating private schools are. Unrestricted cost rate. Do we use the 1920 rate or the 2021 rate that just came out? Basically, your unrestricted indirect cost rate is loaded into the expenditure reporting system. Depending on the service delivery time of the expense, the system will automatically use the appropriate rate. Because this grant goes from March 13th of 2020 through September 30th of 22, any expenditures that are entered for a service period March 13th through June 30th of 20 are going to use the 1920 indirect cost rate. Any expense from July 1, 20 through June 30th, 21 will use the 2021 rate. And if you do carryover into the 21-22 school year, that will use the 21-22 indirect cost rate. Confusing, I know, but it's just how it is. The good news for you is this program into the eGrants expenditure reporting system, so it will automatically be charged against the correct rate. We're a Title I district. All our campuses are Title I. Does that mean our option would be 1A or 1B? No, you still have the option of option 2 as well. Okay, next question is the unrestricted rate limited to 8% as been the TEA rule with regard to federal sources in the past to apply the district's higher rate? No, this is one of the few and only times you can use an unrestricted indirect cost rate. And you have up to the full value of your unrestricted rate that you can charge as indirect cost under this grant. One of the few times you will ever see a federal grant allow you to use the unrestricted rate. I think the next one is the unrestricted rate subject to a cap when charging against the cost. I think that's pretty much the same thing. No, you can charge up to your maximum unrestricted indirect cost rate. Same answer as before. Do we deduct the indirect cost rate from the total planning amount and then calculate, I'm assuming per pupil amounts for PNPs in district, or do we have to deduct the indirect cost rate only from the district's portion? You must calculate the equitable service amount off your total ESSER allocation before you deduct anything else. So you calculate the amount of service off your total ESSER award. Then any administrative costs, which indirect falls into administrative costs, then you deduct those costs. Now, any admin cost you're going to charge to equitable services must also be discussed in consultation with the private school officials, but you calculate it off the total amount. Application allows pre-award costs. This presentation says the expenditures may not begin until the consultation process is complete. How does that work? Pre-award costs are allowable. You just cannot start paying for expenditures until consultation is completed. After consultation is completed, you may still go back and reimburse your district for pre-award costs that are allowable. You just can't provide any service to public or private schools until the consultation has occurred. Clarify, 2021 Title A methodology for supplement, not supplant, must include ESSER in the calculations. Generally, yes. Not on the technical aspect, because your methodology is the distribution of state and local funds to Title I campuses. It's the way you're including it in the Title I methodology is the distribution of state and local funds to Title I campuses, keeping that distribution neutral to Title I and ESSER funds that are already on the campus. We'll be working with the Title I staff on that new issue. We'll probably put a training out just for that one little topic. 198 of you are hanging on till the end. Good for you. And the thing is we keep answering questions, the number of questions keeps increasing. So 21 minutes left, all we've got, so we're going to keep going. If the district using ESSER funds to compensate for the reduction in FSP, does that mean it has to use option 2 to calculate? Most likely, yes. If you're reimbursing for the FSP reduction, you are probably spending that money district-wide. So most likely, then yes, you have to use option 2. Will ESSER grant amounts, since there is a related reduction? Will ESSER grant amounts, since there's a related reduction in FSP in 1920, be recorded on the books as revenue in 1920 and related receivable, whether spent or not, thereby resulting in possible fund balance in 266, or will revenues only be recorded as expenditures coded through 266 with other federal grants? We have heard differing answers on that. Bottom line, ESSER is a federal grant, and you charge it to the books when you make the expenditure. Because the reduction in your FSP is in the 1920 school year, and you may not expend these funds till 2021 or even 21-22, you could actually end up with a revenue deficit in your 1920 books, because this is a federal grant. You have to treat it like a federal grant, just like every other federal grant. The fact that they are offsetting a reduction in FSP with it does not change the fact that it is a federal grant and it follows all the federal rules, and you treat it just like any other federal grant. If private school doesn't want to provide economic data, must the district choose option 2? No. If the district has chosen option 1B, where they need the low-income student data in order to make the calculation, if the private school refuses to provide that data, then the total calculated equitable service amount would be lower, because at some point the district has to do the calculation. Now that private school can still receive service, but the total equitable share for private school equitable services would be reduced by not having that data, not having those student counts included. But it does not force the district to use option 2. The LEA chooses option 1B. Private school has not participated in Title I in the past. Does that mean they would be participating in Title I in 2021? No, this is not Title I funding. It is not a Title I program. It just has a couple of connections where the statute uses Title I processes and formulas. But no, participating in ESSER is not participating in Title I. I use ESSER funds to pay 100% of salaries during a specific time period for staff and all school-wide projects. Would that be considered a supplant? There is no supplant rule in ESSER, so you don't have to worry about that. Does the new rule change the quarterly reporting pieces? No. Unfortunately, we wish they'd put a rule out that we didn't have to do quarterly reporting, but it does not change anything on quarterly reports. And we still don't have the rules or the guidance or the data elements for quarterly reports from USDE yet. So we'll do another one of these trainings on quarterly reports as soon as we get that information from USDE. If the LEA is required to document the type of process followed by prioritizing needs, should the PNP submit this information to the LEA as well? One of the questions in the district's application is how did you prioritize your needs? And one of the options in there is a checkbox that says through consultation with private school officials. Your private school needs are prioritized by that consultation process. So the district would check that option in the application. Whether or not you collect additional data from the private school would be a decision that the district and the private school officials agree upon during consultation. Just a little side note, if you have participating private schools and you don't mark that option that you prioritize based on consultation with private schools, that will probably be a monitoring finding. If the LEA is required to that's the same question. Sorry, Lenitra's still typing. What does Title I neutral mean? Title I neutral in the Title I supplement not supplant methodology means that decisions for distributing state and local funds to campuses is not impacted by the fact that some campuses receive Title I funds or now receive ESSER funds and others don't. So the fact that campus gets Title I doesn't play into the picture. It's Title I neutral. You allocate state and local funds by this formula. Title I schools happen to get additional Title I money. That's because Title I has to be supplemental. So that's what Title I neutral means. What if a district submitted their ESSER application, received 20% with the preliminary no-go, consulted with PNPs, and began spending ESSER funds before the IFR? You have to cease spending money at this point until you do any required reconsultation to talk about the changes. This is where the required amendment may be necessary as well. If you have to reopen, you've already submitted, you've got a preliminary no, you already started spending money. All that was allowable until yesterday. And now you have to redo consultation. You have to stop spending money for anybody, district or public or private, until you redo that consultation piece that's required. What do you mean by not spending any funds until consultation? We're using ESSER funds for expenditures that occurred from March 13th on. You're allowed pre-award costs. You're allowed to pay for expenses back to March 13th. However, You are not allowed to make any decisions until you have done your private school consultation requirement, just like all your ESSER programs, just like Title I, just like Title II. You can't move forward with a program until the private school consultation is completed. And this is the same, except the IFR made it a little bit stricter requirement. You can't spend money on anything until consultation is completed. Once the consultation is completed, you'll be able to go back and reimburse for those pre-award expenditures. Previous instructions advised that ESSER funding could be used. Oh, it's the same question, sorry. I just answered that. Let me go to the next one. If serving all campuses, non-Title I and Title I, and at the district level, do we still have to include ESSER in the Title I supplement not supplant methodology for 2021? What about the methodology for 1920? We're going back to pre-award costs back in April. The Title I supplement not supplant methodology is only impacted if you are allocating all the money to Title I campuses only. So in your question, you're spending the money on non-Title I campuses, Title I campuses, and at the district level. That does not impact the methodology for supplement not supplant under Title I. So if LEH uses option 1B, and the funds will be utilized to cover expenses from 1920 school year and that were incurred due to COVID, does the LEA need to update its 1920 supplement not supplant methodology? No, your 1920 Title I methodology has already been done and implemented, and you should not, but I will tell you, with an auditor, they better not see that you changed your allocation of state and local just because you allocated this money to Title I campuses. But you don't have to go back and update last year's methodology. Just don't divert state and local funds off those campuses just because you gave them ESSER funds. If we choose to use Title I funds for all our Title I funds for our Title I schools and ESSER only for Title I secondary, are we in compliance? Oh, hey, your Title I serves all Title I schools. Yeah, that's obvious. Hey, you want to allocate all your ESSER money to Title I secondary campuses only? You're in compliance. You're still allocating all the money to Title I campuses only, so you can then calculate equitable service by 1A, 1B, or 2. But yeah, the district has the discretion how to use the ESSER money anywhere across the district. All our campuses are Title I. We plan to spend all the money on the Title I campuses, but the expenditures will be made from the district to be used by the campuses. Can we choose option 1A, 1B, or do we have to use option 2? I think it's a 1A, 1B, or 2 option because you're spending all the money on Title I campuses, but I'm going to send that question to the attorneys to make sure. So whoever wrote that question, you may want to check back with us because we're going to send that one to the attorneys just to make sure we're right. If we had our consultation regarding ESSER and used option 2 for our ESSER allocation to PNPs, can we move forward with the application and submit the signed ESSER affirmation later? You're still going to have to amend the application. If you submit the application now, before we get the changes in the application forms, you will still have to submit an amendment at some point because you have to tell us what you're doing. It's not going to change your services to the private schools, but you're still going to have to redo the application schedule. And then, yes, you can submit the ESSER affirmation of consultation later by the September 30th deadline. Q&A number 5 for ESSER states that pre-award costs are back to March 13th. You say no expense allowable till the grant award NOGA. You can't spend money until you can't actually pay for anything until you get at least the preliminary NOGA. This is the same question we've had a couple of times. The costs are allowable back to March 13th. You just can't pay for those costs until after consultation. And technically, you can't pay for them until you get a NOGA because you can't write a check on this account until you have a grant award. Your business office may allow you to start charging to the account once you submit the application, but you're still not going to be able to actually reimburse and pay those pre-award costs back to March 13th until you actually have a grant award, because you can't pay for anything until you have a grant award. Your business office will determine when you can start charging, but the new IFR, the new rule, says you can't provide any service until the consultation is done. After that, after the consultation, you can submit the application, you'll get an award, then you can go back and pay for those expenses back to March 13th. This is no different than anything in any of your federal grants about pre-award. It's the same rules. You just have this one little extra caveat in this new rule that you can't provide any service, public or private, until consultation is done. If the PNP is asking for property, dividers, desks, etc. for social distancing, is this allowable under the ESSER grant? Yes, most likely this equipment is allowable for Equitable service. However, at the end of the grant period, September 30th, 2022, all that equipment will revert back to the district. All right, we've got 5 minutes before the system is going to shut us off. I'm going to scroll through. There's 31 questions left. I'm going to scroll through and see if anything really jumps out at me that I need to make sure and answer, because I'm not going to get 31 questions done in the next 5 minutes. And so I'm going to state some things generally as I scroll through here. If your equitable service amount is more than 5%, yes, you still need to contact my office. At the point after all the grant applications are submitted, we will issue additional funds to cover the amount above the 5%. And so that nothing changes, that's still the same. If you don't have any private nonprofit schools within your boundaries, yes, you must still make a good faith effort to give notice in case there might have been a new school open within the last year that you do not know about, but you just have to give some type of notice that you document that you put it out there. And there's several more questions about the private, Title I private, supplement not supplant methodology. We'll do a training separate on that for the Title I people and the business office people. Can you take indirect cost on private nonprofit expenses as well? Yes, that's part of your district administrative cost. Some of these questions are repeats we've already answered. Private nonprofit services, actual reimbursement to the private nonprofits, you've got to hold off on that. We can't, we don't have flexibility to allow the district to actually write a check to reimburse the private school for something they bought in March. Yeah, let's say several questions. There's a question about private schools getting pre-award back to March 13th. I think they do, but we'll check. There's several questions in here about that, so I think we're going to check on that and make sure that I'm right on that. How can they have pre-award if you're not allowed to write them a check? Well, there are some potential ways. Again, that's tied in with needing that answer from USDE, but it potentially could be allowable. Question: if USD does give that flexibility and allows to write a check for reimbursement to the private school, will they need to go back to consultation? Anytime there's any change in services or potential change in services, consultation is an ongoing process. It is not a one and done process. You should be continually meeting with private school officials throughout the year anyway, and anything that potentially changes, yes. Verification order: we ordered instructional materials in April, received them and paid for them in May out of state comp ed funds and local funds, so they've already been paid for. Can we now, after consultation, can we adjust the payment to charge the expenses to ESSER or not charge it to ESSER because it's already been paid? You are allowed reimbursing yourself for pre-award costs, so that potentially could be reimbursed and paid with ESSER funds. And that's several of these. Actually, we're hitting some duplicate questions now. So pre-award is still allowable. You just can't spend money until after consultation has occurred. But after that point, you can go back and do the reimbursements for pre-award. Yeah, here's a new question. Our school does not have any private schools, but there are some students who are being homeschooled. Are they entitled to equitable services? Homeschools are considered to be private schools. The key is whether they can document nonprofit status and that it existed prior to March 13th. Simply students who were taught by parents at home as part of home learning after schools closed who are normally enrolled in the district, that's not a homeschool. But true homeschools, if they also have a documented private nonprofit status, could potentially be eligible. I informed my private schools we could not reimburse them because we could not upload receipts. Shall I retract that? At this point, you don't have to retract that, no, because at this point you can't send a check and reimburse private schools. That would be flexibility USD would have to offer us. And so right now you're okay with that. So we reserve indirect cost on the PNP share to administer the PNP program after consultation, of course. Yes, that's allowable. You can charge indirect cost to the whole total grant, including PNP services. It is admin cost.